I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. 4S versus 6S, which is better? Are we still talking about this? Yes, we are. And the reason we're still talking about this is because there's a test that you guys have asked for that I still haven't done yet. And today's the day we're going to do it. Today, we're going to do bench testing with my fancy schmancy expensive battery test machine. And I've got 4 packs, a 6S 1050 and a 6S 1250, and the equivalent 4S packs of 1500 and an 1800 milliamp hour. And for all of you guys who've been saying, if 6S 1250 is so good, why is nobody flying 4S 1800? We're going to find out the answer. For those of you guys who have been saying, oh, flight tests, oh, that's fine, but what about a nice rigorous bench test? Today is your day. And I think you're going to be pretty interested to see the results. When people go on YouTube and say 6S low KV is awesome, you should try it, one of the criticisms that's often leveled against them is that they're not doing a true apples to apples comparison. People commonly fly 6S 1250 milliamp hour packs, and they compare that to something like a 4S 1500 milliamp hour, and that's actually just a bigger battery. The right way to compare batteries of different voltages is by their watt hours. So a 1000 milliamp hour 6S has more, I guess it's power, energy. It has more in it than a 1000 milliamp hour 4S because 25 volts and 1000 milliamp hours is more than 17 volts and 1000 milliamp hours. The higher voltage matters. And watt hours is how we take into account that higher voltage. So the batteries that we're using in this roundup are carefully selected to have as similar a watt hour as possible. So we've got an 1800 milliamp hour 4-cell, which has 26.64 watt hours. We've got a 1250 milliamp hour 6-cell, which has 27.75 watt hours. The astute among you will realize that those aren't identical numbers, but we can't just make an arbitrarily sized battery. We have to pick and choose from what's on the shelf, and that's pretty close. We'll see if it makes a difference. We've also got a 1050 milliamp hour 6S at 23 watt hours and a 1500 4S at 22 watt hours. Another way of comparing two batteries is by looking at their weight. And all else being equal, a heavier battery will have more energy in it. It'll just be a bigger battery. But all else is not equal in the real world. The actual milliamp hours, efficiency, and so forth of the battery will not be exactly the same. We can see that the 1800 4S is 222 grams. The comparable 6S is only 211 grams. So this battery has a slightly smaller watt hours, but a slightly larger weight. And that means that the energy density, watt hours per gram, is slightly lower for the 4S. If this all is borne out by experimental testing, it would indicate that you were, in fact, getting more sort of power per gram by going to 6S. But, of course, the numbers on the label aren't always perfectly correct. We'll test the batteries and we'll see if this bears out. If we look at the 1050 milliamp hour 6S versus the 1500 milliamp hour 4S, we see that the weight of the 6S is a little bit higher, which is kind of what we would expect since the watt hours is a little bit higher. And in fact, if we look at the energy density for these two batteries, it's almost identical. So the bigger battery is also slightly heavier. It's actually kind of weird that that pattern doesn't play out in the 1800 and the 1250. And that may indicate that something about the label of one of those batteries is not going to match our test results. The first test we did is a 1C discharge rate. So for the 1800 milliamp hour pack, we discharge at 1.8 amps. For the 1500 milliamp hour pack, we discharge at 1.5 amps and so on. And the goal of this test is to just provide a baseline for comparison. You can't always trust that the numbers on the label are 100% accurate. Even if the numbers on the label are accurate, maybe you got a bad pack. So by running the 1C test, you very gently discharge the battery and you see how it stacks up to its label capacity. And what we see is that the 1800 milliamp hour 4S was almost dead on in terms of its labeled milliamp hours, whereas the 1250 milliamp hour 6S actually was a little bit low. I want to be clear that this is not intended to imply that the label is dishonest. When the manufacturer specs their milliamp hour capacity, they use their own test protocol. I'm using a different test protocol, so It doesn't mean anything about the honesty of the label, but it just means that we can compare the actual usable capacity of these two batteries. And this kind of makes sense because the 6S pack was lighter than the 4S pack. And yet it was supposed to have like more watt hours, but we see that actually, effectively speaking, it has less. Meanwhile, the 1056S had a little bit more amp hours in it than the label says it ought to, and the 1500 4S is just about dead on. The next thing we do is we start discharging these batteries at higher and higher amps. So we start with 20 amps, then 40 amps, 60 amps, 80 amps. And then after that, we do a 900 watt discharge. So we'll start with the Race Day Quad 1500 milliamp hour 4S. That is this purple line here. And we'll just move along the line until we find the data point where the voltage hits 13.2 volts. And we'll see that, there we go, 20.1 watt hours and 810 data points. And we'll compare it to this greenish line, which is the 1056S. And we see that it discharged 22.8 watt hours and 919 data points. In this case, the winner is definitely the 6S. The 6S battery of equivalent, close to equivalent size and watt hour, discharged for a longer period of time at the same number of watts, and therefore, as expected, discharged more watt hours. But if we go back to the original data, this may not be so surprising because the labeled watt hours on the 1050, 23.31 out of 22.2, it is 5% larger in terms of watt hours, 200 out of 180, 200 out of 188. It is 6% larger in size. So if we take the 22.8 watt hours that the 6S discharged and we divide it by the 20.1 watt hours of the 4S, we should see that it was 5% more. And we don't. We see that it was 13% more. Even if you account for the fact that this 1056S is a slightly larger battery and a slightly heavier battery, it still outperformed the 4S by a fair margin. Here's the 6S 1250 line, this orange one. We're going to go down to 19.8 volts. And here we go. 25 watt hours, 1005 data points. Compared to the 1800 milliamp hour 4S, we got 13.2 volts is the cutoff. There we go. 24.7 watt hours and 993 data points. Now, frankly, I'm willing to call these two too close to call. It's very, very close. And obviously, if we were to test 10 of these batteries, we wouldn't get exactly the same number for each one. But the 6S one did win. Even though in this case, the 4S battery was significantly heavier, and the 4S battery discharged more watt hours at the 1C discharge rate, the 6S one still won when it came to testing it at a constant 900 watt discharge. So, case settled then, right? No, obviously not. There needs to be more tests on more batteries before we can draw any definitive conclusions. Any test on just one battery is not definitive. But you have to do one test before you can do 50 tests, and this is the first one. I do think this test continues to validate the claim that there is an advantage to 6S. And we haven't even broached the idea of like stick feel and PID tuning and the quad just responding and flying better because of the high voltage. We're just testing raw watt hours and flight time. Why is there a difference? I don't know. Because if two batteries are indeed the same C rate, the same internal resistance, and the same watt hours, they really should perform exactly the same in a constant power test. So maybe what this points to is that the reason that some 6S batteries perform better goes down to like the manufacturing of the batteries. Maybe there's just something different about the way the 6S cells are constructed or shaped, or I don't know. But here's the bottom line. You wanted a bench test of an 1800 4S, a 1256S, a 1500 4S, and a 1056S, and here it is. And you've seen the raw data, and now you can fill the comments up with your own opinions. Do you have any insights here? Do you have any insights here? I'm not 100% sure what to make of this data. I mean, it'd be easy to say 6S1. I don't think it's that simple. But I don't know. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. And thank you. Now we're done. This is what more could you ask for about 6S? You know what you could ask for, actually? I haven't flown the 1800 yet. I didn't want to risk damaging it before I was done testing it. I haven't flown an 1800 4S, and it's about 10 grams heavier than the 6S. Maybe it's worse. I don't know. We should at least give that a try and see how it compares to a 6S pack. Maybe I'll do that in a few weeks. But for now, we're going to call this one done. Thank you guys so much for watching, and happy flying.